Hi, I'm Jimmy Aluria with Victory Team Building Group, and today I want to talk to you about the different definitions of profit. There's a lot of confusion in our industry, in the automotive repair industry, about what the differences of the terms are and how you get those numbers to the bottom line. And so I'm going to do a series of videos here. This one is going to be a broad view of gross profit and net profit and how we get to those numbers. So in the following videos, I'm going to break it down even further to really give a picture of where these numbers come from and how you as the shop owner or the manager have control of these numbers and how you calculate them. This is going to help you with figuring out your markup on your parts, your setup, your matrices in your point of sale system, your management system. It's also going to help you figure out what your labor rate is based on your costs. So this is a really important video for training both owners, managers, and possibly service advisors to understand these numbers, which makes it a lot easier when you understand the numbers to get to the bottom line of what you're trying to hit. So I'm going to show you a couple definitions here. Let me go to my screen. Okay, so let's define profit. Now, profit is the excess of the selling price of goods over their costs, right? So it's the difference between what something costs and what it was sold for. That difference is what your profit is. I know this is really, really basic, but as we go along here, I think it's going to be very beneficial to you to understand how these things differ, these terms differ. And I don't want to go into the terms until I give you the definitions. So if you look at this here, you got a sale minus the cost equals profit. So we have a $3,000 sale minus $1,000 costs, whether that's parts and labor or whatever it was you're selling. You have a $2,000 profit. Pretty simple, right? Okay. Now we get into some terminology that we hear often in our industry, like gross profit. Now, gross profit is defined as the profit a business makes after subtracting all the costs that are related to manufacturing and selling its products or services. You can calculate gross profit by deducting the costs of goods sold from your total sales. Now, this is the number that's going to show up in your shop management system. Your gross profit numbers is usually what's going to show up versus your net profit, which is really what you're going to see in QuickBooks or in your accounting system at the end of the month. So gross profit, for example, is you got your total sale. The total sale of parts, labor, and sublet services minus your cost of goods sold. In auto repair, that's your parts, labor, and sublet. So you have your sale of your parts, labor, and sublet minus your costs of parts, labor, and sublet. And that gives you your gross profit. Dollars. And I say dollars because I'm going to explain here another term in a second, in a little bit, about what we're talking about, the difference between gross profit dollars and gross profit margin. Okay? So for example, we have a $3,000 sale of parts, labor, and sublet. That's what the customer pays. Our costs for the parts were $500. Our cost for the labor was $500. That's what we paid our technician and any of their taxes that go with their payroll. Minus the sublet services, or maybe it's a towing bill that came in. It was $100. So $3,000 minus $1,100 is $1,900 in gross profit. Okay, so we have the sale minus the cost of goods sold equals our gross profit dollars. All right. Now, let's talk about net profit. Net profit is the actual profit after working expenses, also known as operating expenses, not included in the calculation of gross profit, have been paid. So the actual profit after operating expenses, not included in the calculation of gross profit, have been paid. Okay, so in gross profit, we're talking about parts, labor, sublet. In net profit, we're talking about all those other working expenses or operating expenses that weren't in the calculation of gross profit. Okay, for example, we have gross profit minus your operating expenses. Okay, and that would include your utilities, rent, marketing, non-tech wages. So any management owners that are working in the business, insurance, all that stuff is your operating expenses. That will give you your net profit dollars. Okay, so for example, we have $60,000 in gross profit for the month minus $40,000 in operating expenses. We have a $20,000 net profit. Okay, so the gross profit was the amount that was remaining after we took out parts and labor and sublet. That's the $60,000. And then we have all of our other expenses, the $40,000, and that gives us a $20,000 net profit dollars. Okay. Hope everybody's with me. If you're not with me, go back and review those 2 slides before you move on, okay? Just watch it again. It's very simple. This is not complicated, but most people haven't been explained the difference between these numbers. Okay, so now let's talk about profit margin. Now, profit margin is the percentage of sale that a business retains after all expenses have been deducted. So, for example, this is a percentage. When you're talking about margin, margin equals percentage. Okay, if you say gross profit, I'm going to expect that you're going to give me a dollar amount. If you say gross profit margin, I'm going to expect that you're going to give me a percentage. So for example here, you got your sales price minus your cost divided by your sale equals your gross profit margin. Okay, so I'm going to show you how this works. So if we take our sales price minus our costs, we had a $500 parts and labor sale, and we had $200 parts and labor costs, we have $300 in profit, and that would be gross profit. Okay? Now, we take that $300 in profit and we divide that by the $500 sale. The profit divided by the sale gives you 60%. If you take 300 on your calculator, 300 divided by 500, you're going to get 0.60. That's 60%. Gross profit margin. Okay, so this is the number that you're going to see in your shop management system. This is what you get. That's how it's figuring it out. It's taking the profit divided by the sale and it's giving you a percentage. And that's the gross profit margin. Okay? If we look at this on a monthly basis, okay, if we took the net profit, okay, same definition of profit margin. Profit margin is the percentage of sale that a business retains after all expenses have been deducted. Okay, so now we're going to take it like on a monthly basis, we're looking for net profit. We're still talking about margin here, still a percentage, but now we take the sales and all of the expenses. And I'm talking like the parts, the labor, the overhead, everything in the last 2 slides. And we divide that by the sale, and that's going to give us our net profit margin. So, for example, okay, we have $100,000 in parts and labor sales, maybe sublets in there too, okay, minus $80,000 in all expenses. So that's the parts, the labor, the sublet, the overhead, okay, marketing, salaries, all that stuff. You have $20,000 in net profit left. So $100,000 in sales with all of your expenses, you have $20,000 in net profit. Now, if we take that $20,000 in net profit and we divide it by the $100,000 in sales, that gives us a 20% net profit margin. Okay, again, margin is percentage. We have a $20,000 net profit, which gave us a 20% net profit margin. And no matter what these numbers are, these numbers might be 21% and 21,000 if it's on 100,000. Okay, but if you just do these calculations in your calculator, it's going to give you the exact number, dollar amount, and then the percentage. Okay. So how does this look on your profit and loss statement? And this is where it's really important to understand these numbers, because your profit margin, your gross profit margin, is very important to follow and make sure that it's not getting too out of whack. There's a lot of people who will argue that you don't need to watch margin. You always need to watch margin. Always. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to throw good jobs away that don't hit your margin criteria, meaning we're not going to do tires because we can't make 60% gross profit margin on tires. Well, that's silly. You can still make gross profit dollars on tires, and usually they don't take very long to do. So it's okay to take those lower profit margin jobs if they're easy to turn around. There's not a lot of risk there, and you can still add those dollars to the bottom line. Okay, but we still need to understand these numbers and where they're coming from. So if we take this $100,000 shop, we have parts and labor sales at the top there, and sublet and tires. Okay, and then we have all of our costs: our parts costs, labor costs, sublet costs, tire costs. Okay, so you have your income on the top, and then your expenses, your costs of goods sold. Okay, $100,000 in sales, $40,000 in cost of goods sold. That's 40% cost. Okay, and what you're left with is 60% gross profit margin. Okay, and what that is it's simply this. If you took your $100,000 sale minus your $40,000 cost, you have $60,000 left. That profit, $60,000, divided by the $100,000 sale, as in the example above, is 60%. It's going to give you 0.6. Okay. Now, in another video, I'm going to go over a little bit more detail about how these numbers work out. But most shops are going to see somewhere around a 40% operating expense. And it might be plus or minus 3 to 10%, depending on what your overhead is. Okay, but most shops are going to be somewhere in the 40% range, plus or minus 5%. So if we took a $100,000 shop and it had $40,000 in operating expenses, all right, you see the number at the bottom there, $40,000 in operating expenses. That also happens to be 40% of the total sale of $100,000. Okay, so we have the $100,000 sale minus the $40,000 cost of goods sold. It leaves us with $60,000 minus the $40,000 in operating expenses. Now we have $20,000 in net profit. And as our example above, you take the $20,000 divided by the $100,000 in sales, and you get a 20% net profit margin. Net profit margin. Okay, and this is why you want to have your bookkeeper or your accountant, you want to make sure that when they give you these financials, that they're giving them with you with percentages. You want to be able to look at the percentages because you can see where your black holes are. And you could do an analysis. Maybe your gross profit margin percentage goes down, but the dollars go up. And then you look at your tire costs and your tire sales. You go, wow, we sold $20,000 in tires this month. Well, of course, your margin, your percentage might go down. And that's okay, as long as it wasn't stopping you from getting high dollar, high profit work done. Okay, you might want to rethink if you have a bunch of high profit work that isn't getting done because you're buried in oil changes and tires. We might have to rethink, the work that we're doing. But again, we'll get into that analysis a little bit later. But you can see here that if you're watching the percentages, you'll be able to see where the shop is doing well and where it is faltering a bit. Now, this is why it's really important to watch margin. And like I said before, margin is not the only thing. Like the percentage is not the only thing you're looking at. You have to look at the profit dollars as well. But one of the first things that I'll look at when I'm analyzing somebody's financials and finding out why they're not making a profit is I will go in and I will look at the financials. And if I see these gross profit numbers too low, I'm gonna dig in a little further and see what kind of work they're doing. Because if you look at this example here, we have this shop. As you'll see, the cost of goods sold is $40,000 or $40,050. That's just the way my spreadsheet calculated it. Okay, just like this one, we have a $40,000 cost. Now, if we have the same shop and the costs were the same, but the margin is different, you would think that it did the same amount of work. If our costs were the same in both of these shops, we would have done the same work, the same brake jobs, the same tires, everything's the same. One shop is charging more than the other. This shop only has a 55% gross profit margin. And as a result, their sales were only $89,000. The other shop was $100,000 on the same costs. Okay, now you might look at that and go, wow, that's a lot of money. It's $11,000. Yeah, well, guess what? Look at the bottom line. This same shop had the same $40,000 in operating expenses. And now we only have 10% net profit margin because the net profit dollars are down to $89.50. Okay? And you also see here that the percentage of operating expenses went up. It's a higher percentage of the overall sale. It's almost 45% operating expenses and it's 45% cost of goods sold. Okay? And this is where you can see that 5% on gross profit margin ends up costing this owner 10% in net profit margin. And this is why you have to know these numbers in and out, and you have to know the ramifications of raising and lowering your prices and keeping your service advisors at certain margins, because it ends up being big money to the bottom line, especially if you're hovering real close to your break even. As you get over your break even, you can afford to lessen your margin a bit and take on lesser profit jobs. Okay. But when you're trying to hit that break even, man, you really need to make sure that you're not taking in a bunch of oil changes and doing a bunch of low margin work, because you might be time bankrupt. You might be running out of time to be able to cover your overhead. Okay, and if you look at these two shops side by side, their expenses and costs of goods sold are almost exactly the same. Yet one shop is making $20,000 a month in profit, and the other shop is making $89.50 in profit. Okay, so that's all I have for this video. There's a lot more to cover on this. I'm going to break this up into other videos because this one was actually pretty long, explaining the difference between gross profit, net profit, gross profit margin, net profit margin, and how those numbers are all interrelated. So I'm going to break it down even further in other videos. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.